Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you watch this. Hope all are well. I do have to say I miss you guys in the classroom. I have nothing but love for my freshmen here at Canton South. We are going to get into part two of Enlightenment. And again, I'm going to give you guys that context, that background information to see how we get to this point where we see people start to challenge everything around them, and becoming conscious of the world they live in, and attempting to lead to social, economic, political changes in their society, and the advancements we get to that age of enlightenment, that age of progress, which I'm asking you folks to read as well. The Enlightenment Now book. The Busy, you guys have already been asked to do that. You guys have a presentation due Friday, your annotations as well. While the my on level class, you folks, you guys have it coming here soon. You guys will be asked to read and annotate the two chapters in a book called Enlightenment Now. Now, in looking at where we're heading, I ended last part one. I ended with Epicurus, looked at ancient philosophy in Greece, and how these guys kind of laid the foundation for what was to come. But we need to understand ancient Greece, it's going to fall like all empires in history have fallen, and we're going to see it shift across here to the Roman Empire, and you're going to see that shift. It's going to be Rome, and Rome is not going to be somebody who really spends a lot of time in Greek philosophy outside of Stoicism, which is all about living a simple life and a profound life and not chasing all the material things in life. So the Roman Empire is obviously going to reach the heights, as you see here, this picture. It's going to be very powerful. It's going to be something that's a force to be reckoned with in Western Europe and even into Asia and Northern Africa. And as again, we understand, it had a lot of political clout and it offered a lot of protection to these places in red. Now, we need to remind ourselves, especially in the past, when people in armies couldn't travel as fast, maps are very deceiving. It looks like, empires are more powerful than what they really are. The people in those local communities had more agency or power than we give them credit for. But we understand that people will look for Rome for protection and be part of the Roman Empire. But as I mentioned, nothing lasts forever. We'll see the Roman Empire collapse in stages. The Western Roman Empire will collapse first and the Eastern later. And you're going to see, as a result, I want you to imagine yourself, waking up one day and realizing that your government, your used to be able to protect you, can no longer protect you. And what most historians argue, with the collapse of the Roman Empire, we see the dawn of the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages is going to be something that we see here, looking at, there's no longer police or army that can protect you. There's no longer, the construction of roads or schools. The trade routes dry up, and as a result, the economy is going to collapse, and things go backwards almost in many regards. And I don't want to say backwards, but we don't have that progress. We don't have that growth, and you're going to see, as a result, society breaks down, and with the government no longer are able to protect, you're going to see fear and ignorance kind of consume man. And when people are afraid, human beings are afraid, they turn to higher powers. And it's going to create a vacuum when the Roman Empire is not there. This vacuum, and the way I see vacuums is kind of like going to the beach. You pick that sand out by the ocean, it's going to fill right back in. Somebody has to fill that vacuum, and we're going to see that vacuum in the Dark Ages. It's going to be filled by the church. The Roman Catholic Church, to be exact. And it's going to offer some kind of order in such a chaotic time. And we understand, though, with this, the church will control information and knowledge. And they're going to have a lot of power. And we know that, looking at history, we see that power is oftentimes can corrupt us. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. You see here Lord Acton. And going back to Lincoln, he says, if you ever want to test a true man's character, give that person power. And We understand that this church will control the information. Local priests have a lot of power in these areas. People turn to them. Again, that fear, they're going to turn to God. Things are horrible in the present, so they're going to kind of live for the afterlife and not really worry about the present so much, the day to day. They are trying to survive day to day, but again, they're hoping to have a eternal happiness in heaven, and the priests and the religious leaders are kind of reinforcing that. And they kind of look at any kind of knowledge outside of the Bible is not considered important. If God really wanted us to know, then he would have put it in the Bible. So, exploring and asking questions and trying to find the intricacies of clouds to trees to spider webs, it's not in the Bible. So if it's not in the Bible, it must not be something that we need to know. And people kind of don't ask those questions. When I say people, again, we're talking about generally, we're talking about the majority of the populations. And again, they look at knowledge at that time, like intricacies of clouds, trees, or spider webs, as just trivia. And looking at trivia, and I think some of you guys view education as just trivia, facts, and things that you can't actually apply. There's not really a pursuit of trying to find out more. Now, as I mentioned, the church is going to abuse some of that power. They control that information. And remember this, there's going to be one thing they do offer, and it's called selling indulgences. This is going to be at the root of a reformation that's going to challenge the church. It's going to break apart, lead to Protestantism and some with Lutheran and Calvin. And you see that one of the things that the church would do would sell indulgences. And when you're selling indulgences, what they were able to do are argue is if you give the church money, and they would charge you based off your social class, then they could actually reduce the sentence to purgatory for your sins. And your loved one's sins. If you had a loved one die, they said they could communicate to God, and they can actually lessen their time in that resting place before they go to heaven. So this is something that people bought into. They listened to the church. And the church, again, had the power, and again, they're going to abuse some of that power. Now, one thing you did not do during the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, medieval times also it's known as, is question the church. And by questioning the church, you see a lot of people who would be burned at the stake, very barbaric way to go out. And the church really practiced the Ptolemaic. They don't take a lot of Greek philosophy because we had to look back at ancient Greece. There's no universal God. So there's multiple gods. And we look at this is, they do take Ptolemy, and they argue that Ptolemy, who's an ancient Greek kind of astronomer, he's going to argue that the earth is the center of the universe. The church takes that as fact, and they preach that this is true. The earth is at the center of the universe. And again, they have control of the Bible. Again, we need to remind ourselves, literacy rates were very low at this time. So those who could read controlled the information. And local priests could read, and they control the information, and that information is power, and it's going to keep others in line. Now, it's also a time during the Dark Ages where superstition was something that was very prevalent. It was all over the place. There was this belief that if there were bad crops, if there was a plague, if there was disease, that it must be because they were not sacrificing enough, we weren't praying hard enough. And, even lightning bolts, people believe it came down from God, angry God, who's trying to punish us or send us a message. And people thought, bad luck. And we will see that this is something that, is something that was true. And again, superstition stems from ignorance. They don't really understand, so they just say, "Oh, it must be God that sent a message." And people don't question the science behind it. And we also have at the time stories that pass down. And we have 4 of them here. If you ever want to look into them, I find them interesting. This is the Tower of Babel. And this talks about how human beings try to build a tower all the way to heaven, but God will send down essentially a curse on the human beings building the tower, and they can't communicate, and they can't talk to each other, and they no longer can build a tower. Another one's the story of Gilgamesh. And looking at Gilgamesh, he's going to be somebody who loses a good friend, and he's going to be saddened by it, and he's going to try to go conquer death. And he realizes on this journey as he defeats a lion that death is inevitable, and it's something we just need to accept. We have over here, we have Icarus, who him and his dad are going to fly out of a prison, and his dad tells him, "Listen, son, do not fly too high because the sun will melt your wax." And Icarus is not going to listen to his dad, and he's going to fly too high, and he's going to fall to his death. And then we have the story of Gollum over here. This is a Jewish tale where the Jews, looking for protection, are going to create this monster called Gollum, who is going to look for protection, but it's going to actually end up destroying their town and village. It's out of control. And these stories, I think, are powerful because every time man attempts to advance, whether it's conquering death, whether it's to build tall towers, whether it's to learn how to fly, we see a very negative outcome as a result. And these things, I think, again, put that proverbial lid on people trying to experiment, to explore. It's just not possible. We can't do that. That's ridiculous. And we'll see these things questioned. And it's, again, get to the period we live in today. Now, during the Dark Ages, we're going to see actually the spread of a certain religion, and you can see the spread starts in 630 with the founder Muhammad, but the Islamic faith, Muslim faith, and you see this is going to spread. And one thing that these guys tap into, and the Middle East, we can thank for this, is when they conquer parts of the Ottoman Empire, and well, it becomes the Ottoman Empire. And we'll talk about them in World War I a little bit, but we see that they tap into ancient Greece and those philosophers, and they're going to kind of resuscitate them. They're going to bring them back to life, these ideas. And with these ideas, and they're going to translate these guys, and eventually these ideas are going to spread over to Italy, Florence, especially the city, and it's going to lead to us exploring this stuff and questioning things. And we see that this is looking at this time, all this trade and stuff going on, this will lead to technological and scientific knowledge spreading. And it's something that kind of marks a renewed interest in the ancient Greeks, in the classical culture of it, which will get us into the time period known as the Renaissance. Now, historians, we look at this, Renaissance actually means rebirth. And this is really a rebirth in our past, the ancient Greeks, a rebirth in human beings. And we'll see humanism at the start. Now, this is focused around Italy, and it's a cultural rebirth, and it focuses not just in Italy, but a specific city called Florence, which was kind of the bridge between the medieval and the modern world. It's the trade. A lot of trade comes in from the East, and these ideas from the Far East are going to and these ancient ideas from ancient Greece are going to kind of evolve, and they're going to be applied in society eventually. But the Renaissance is really cultured or focused around art, and it's kind of this discovery of ourselves. Again, we're relearning ancient lessons from Rome and Greece. You have, looking at ancient scholars, looking at grammar and history and moral philosophy, and we see this yearning in Italy especially. And again, we have to look at Italy wasn't Italy at the time. It was a bunch of different city-states. And when I say city-states, you got Florence, you got Venice, you have Rome, obviously, but you have these different cities, and people identified themselves as with cities, not with a nation per se. But again, we're going to see the start of people taking pride in a country, an area, more than just your city. But you're going to see people, when I say people, those at the top, they're going to start searching libraries for forgotten texts. It's going to be kind of like finding a buried treasure within your own house, and get in touch with themselves, their ancient ancestors. And there was this passion to kind of rediscover different things of the past, not invent new things, but discover things of the past. And you're looking back at that past to kind of, again, find yourself in the present. And it was kind of the scholars of the day, they would search for this truth, and they would kind of start to challenge some long-held beliefs in the life around them. And the Renaissance is rebirth. It's kind of a birth of a new age that's filled with hope and promise. And we start seeing men start to awaken their mind a little bit. And we start to see, when I say men, I mean women as well. But when you see this zest and the self-confidence that really define the times, and you start seeing the Renaissance. And it's identified Italians. We look in America. 1776 is our founding moment. 1789 in France is the revolution founding. It's something that it's a benchmark. It's a watershed moment. 1494 is kind of the end of the golden age in Italy. But we see that this is 15th century, so 1400s, the Renaissance, and it'll be Italians that actually identify and actually label the time period they're escaping out of. And that's the dark. Wow, where's that at? That's the Dark Ages. Um, but again, we need to remind ourselves, be conscious of the fact when we're living history is different than written history. And what I mean by that is people living during the Renaissance, the majority of the population had no idea that they were living a part of a historic moment. It was more of a top-down in the Renaissance. And again, we don't get the diaries, the journals from the common man because the common man could not read or write, and they could not share those ideas on paper, which obviously becomes timeless, some of those ideas. And we start seeing the Renaissance, we see a shift in people's minds from living in the future, living for death, living for an afterlife, and focusing more on the present, the pleasures of earth in the moment. And, you know, this is really what the Renaissance is all about. With the Renaissance, we need to remind ourselves it's focused around the arts, but the arts remain religious. And we have to remind ourselves context is important, that background information. During the 14th century, we see the Black Death, we see the plague kind of spreading throughout Europe. People are going to look more to the church, look for the faith, looking for some kind of protection, some kind of miracle to save them. But we need to remind ourselves the Renaissance lays the foundation for the Reformation and the age of scientific revolution and eventually the age of Enlightenment, which we'll be getting to here shortly. Do you understand, though, that at this time of the Renaissance, the church is still the center? The church actually sponsors a lot of these artists, actually pays them to do some of these paintings and sculptures. And at this time, shrines were everywhere in these cities that were of the Catholic faith. It was never far to worship. You could find on every street corner almost, and courtyards, that there's actually places to worship. And churches, if you went into a church at this time and they were giving a sermon, the rich would sit up front, the poor would stand in the back. And this is something that was going on at the time, so that was a cool little tidbit. And again, we start seeing the monopoly on learning. It starts to shift during the Renaissance in Italy, with the scholars starting to explore this ancient thought, these ancient Greek philosophers, which will again start to question the status quo naturally. And we see, again, it sets that foundation for people challenging the church in the age of Reformation. And eventually it will undermine the churches, the Reformation, which we'll get to. And then Enlightenment will kind of undermine the kings and queens and the absolute monarchs of the day. So we see kind of each gets its own focus, but they all kind of blend together. And this is why put it nice and neat is not always the best way, I guess, to approach it, but it's an easy way for us to kind of digest this information. And again, we see the Renaissance Europe kind of evolve into these separate nation states. We see the seeds planted where we're going to start seeing Germans become German. We're going to start seeing Italians identify themselves as Italians, and the British, and the French, the French. So if we're looking at the Renaissance, it's profound in many ways because of, you can look at Da Vinci's here, humanism, the age of humanism. And this is, humans kind of put themselves, we see people starting to view themselves as humans, and humans as the center of the universe, and the country, in the world, I should say, not God. And we start seeing this changing of the times, and we start seeing people search for truth with logic. And there's still faith and reason, but again, people start to self-educate themselves, and would lead to kind of this. They believe that education would actually lead to an improvement, an increase in the standards of ethics, of our morals. And again, this originates in Italy. Pardon me. So, as I mentioned, this humanism, we start seeing this break from tradition of, the church being God, being the center of everything, and shifting more towards man. And we start seeing a shift in the Renaissance too, that we can actually find ways to improve ourselves and make learning fun, and we have more people living in urban areas, so charm was more a something that was desired, and that man's role in history was no longer a passive one, that they can get involved. It's not just about the church and God. Again, that self-improvement we can see kind of get in the rooted here, and it's kind of this intellectual atmosphere where genius has flourished and human beings are celebrated, and it's kind of an age that we see a shift from the Dark Ages to more that rebirth coming out and finding light, I guess, for lack of a better word, as a metaphor. And excuse me. We're going to see eventually this Renaissance, which starts in Florence, will spread to other parts of Italy, and then eventually it'll spread to the north, to Western Europe and Central Europe as well. And again, I have some paintings here. We got Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, church, and we see again the church is at the root of this art movement. We have the praying hands here from Albrecht. Albrecht Dürer, and we see that this is both these guys. And Michelangelo, I thought was interesting. His father tried to beat his son out of becoming an artist and a sculptor. And Medici, who's a very famous, powerful man in Florence, is going to persuade him that it's actually there's status to be gained for somebody who can sculpt busts. And again, going back to humanism, we start seeing the art shift to making people look more lifelike. They celebrate youth in the Renaissance, which is still celebrated in Western culture. The youth, it pays to be young, and we see that. We also have people begin painting, having portraits painted of themselves and busts at this time. Again, identifying man. We can start seeing these portraits, and there's some cool story. It's a cool story of the praying hands, how we got to that. If you want to look into that, it's about him and his brother. He comes from family 18. I don't want to get into it. If you guys want to, it's actually pretty fascinating story, pretty inspirational. Even though it's probably a embellishment and probably not exactly true, but it's got some cool background to it. Now, going on here, moving on, I thought this is something that's a life lesson. And during the Renaissance, you had two goddesses that were celebrated and talked about. Fortuna, which is, it talks about the goddess Fortuna, which is how things happen by fortune, they happen by chance, off the whim, that, good luck, all that stuff is by chance, but you actually can counter that Fortuna by being sharp-eyed, by being resourceful, by being witty, by researching, educating yourself, things like that. And the other one is Ocasio, which, as you can see here, she has long hair in the front and she's bald in the back. And every once in a while, you will have an occasion present itself and emerge. And if you don't act fastly, that if you don't grab it right away as it's passing by the front of the hair, you'll be grasping at the bald. You won't catch the Ocasio. Which those two goddesses I thought were just cool to kind of look at, to talk about briefly. And again, you're looking at that fortune will come to you in your life. The occasion will present itself in your life. Just make sure you're prepared for when it does arrive. And then we have also the dolphin and anchor emblem that came around this time. And again, looking at how we need to have the activity. We need to, man is made for action, woman is made for action. That we need to be speedy like an anchor, but we have to be disciplined speedy like the dolphin, but we have to be disciplined like with the anchor. We kind of have that push and pull, that ebb and flow, that we need to make sure we have that balance in life. Now, looking at here, at this time, we need to remind ourselves that that most of Europe is Western Europe, especially, but Europe and life. Most people are serfs or peasants, and if we look at this time, 4 out of every 5 Europeans were actually working the soil up until the 16th century, the 1500s, through the 1500s, and the living conditions in these places were squalid. I mean, they were horrible, and you look here. I mean, you have the peasants down here. These people had to kill their live animals before the winter. They had to kill them around the fall because once winter came through, they couldn't afford to feed them, and they're going to put salt and they're going to have to smoke them and they have to ration them during these long winters in Europe, in this temperate zone, in very cold conditions. And you're going to see these peasants consume as much as a gallon of wine or beer on average a day, which again is going to lead to shorter life expectancies, outside of diseases and lack of food. And before they can even feed their family, they had to pay 1/10 of their grain to the church, and 1/3 of their livestock to the church. And they also had to pay their lords, their feudal lords, and they also had to serve them for 60 days, which I thought was interesting. and they couldn't even die without paying a tax to their lords, which sad. And then their roof, their houses made of thatch, floor of earth, clay and rubble houses. It's bitterly cold in the winter, and you couldn't even actually marry until you got the Lord's permission, and you had to pay him an extra tax to do so. And we look at this now. We also understand at this time, this Western Europe, and during the Renaissance, the 1400s, the Western Hemisphere has not been discovered yet by these European powers, and it's still a dark place over there in this area. Like, it's not filled in, and there's this there's this belief that if they travel that way, maybe they'll find something. And at this time, we have a lot of fear in the 1400s because this Black Death is still going around, and we see that there's going to be bad harvests, and fear was pretty rampant with the Black Death that came from the east. Most people think it came from rats. I've heard people say it came from gerbils, or people argue it came from fleas. Again, the origins of them depends on who you ask. Now, the Catholic Church, we need to remind ourselves, is still at the power. It's at the helm of the power. All the roads led through Rome, and many people actually traveled to Rome. It's kind of a pilgrim. It's a Mecca today for the Muslim faith, and we see that this is going to be a place that people are going to travel to. Now, it was at this time very scary to travel. If you were going anywhere, you wanted to make sure you told people which way you were going very loudly if you stayed at a tavern or an inn, and then go the other way. 150-mile travel would take you around 2 weeks, so it's very dangerous, and you'd be lucky just to be robbed. And many people were killed, and the last who got to the inns before night came through were the ones who got the worst stay. And, so travel takes a lot of courage and stamina. The reason why I'm talking about these things, because we're going to be getting into somebody who does some traveling here soon. Now, at this time, and we got to look here during the Renaissance, the 1440, we see Gutenberg come up with the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg, he's going to do this in 1440, and this is going to be revolutionary. And this printing press will change the course of history, and information and knowledge become available for the first time in history across a wide spectrum. Beforehand, you used to have to use a knife. People would use a knife into a wood and write things like a pen. And if we look at this, the books improved very little over the last 1,000 years, since the beginning of man, until the printing press. And professional scribes, they could spend 4 to 5 months copying a 200-page text on sheepskins, which sheepskins were very expensive. And the cost of these books coming out were so expensive, it would take possibly, for 30 volumes, it may pay one man's expensive for 7 years in 15th century Italy. But when these books start being printed out in these printing presses, it's going to challenge ignorance. We're going to see a lust for information like never seen before. And, this thing was so reliable and versatile that it's actually will not be improved really until another 350 years later. So this printing press is ahead of its time, and it's now going to allow ideas to spread much more rapidly. Books become cheaper because you can mass produce these, and they become more inexpensive. And we start seeing literacy rates across Western Europe, Central Europe, start to skyrocket. And, you're going to see, more books printed in a few decades than were copied by hand in several centuries past. And it's just crazy how this education, this intellectual, this knowledge is going to take off. And this thing's as revolutionary as the internet is today. And, if you look at it, by 1500, Europe possessed an estimated 9 million books. So 60 years after the printing press, compared to only 100,000 books 50 years previously. So you see these books being mass produced. And again, this invention is going to revolutionize society. And you're going to see more and more people reading. And with more and more people reading, they're going to get more empowered and more confident. And we're going to see growth of human progress. So again, find the life lesson here. You folks, during this time, when you're home right now, you should be, whenever you're not doing your schoolwork, you should be reading and learning as much as you possibly can, because it's going to embolden you, it's going to give you more confidence, and it's going to allow you to tackle things down the road that would not been able to do so beforehand. And we see people start to challenge and rebel against the old superstitions and fears, and this and if you look at where this was invented, it's going to be invented in Germany. It's going to be invented by Gutenberg, as I mentioned, and Germany will be kind of the leader of printing this information and sending it over to Western Europe. And it's going to, again, lead to this people challenging the old traditions. And if you're challenging old traditions, you're going to be challenging maybe the church. Now, if we look here at the printing press, this just captures pen is mightier than the sword. And we see this, these two illustrations capture it. And the argument can be made here is, if you look at, ideas are timeless. We have ideas that stretch time, but the weapons do not. For example, the sword, the pen is mightier than the sword. The sword is not really something that is very common in modern combat. It has not become timeless. It's not a timeless weapon in warfare. And you see that other weapons, and whether it's naval ships, they're outdated compared to in the past. And they become outdated, so they're not timeless. And Tupac here, Qatari, not Shakur, is going to argue, you kill me today, you'll be killed by, I believe, Spain. He'll say, you kill me today, but tomorrow I come back 1,000 thousands. And we see that these ideas are going to spread like wildfire. And we're going to see one of those ideas brought up right around this time right here. Now, if we look at, I told you guys that the Western Hemisphere has not been explored yet. It's not something that is people or kings and queens are all about. It's risky, it's expensive, and it's kind of like space flight today. And you're going to see, though, that King Ferdinand is going to, and Queen Isabella are going to, and we see this guy, Christopher Columbus, he's going to be bouncing around trying to get kings and queens to give him the green light to travel across the Atlantic Ocean, and he believes that he's going to find a route to China, to the Asian markets. And what happened at this time, we got to look at Middle East was in control of they were the middleman. They were geographically located between Europe and Asia, so they're going to be charging high prices on buying and trading and selling goods. And we're going to see, as a result, Christopher Columbus is going to head across the Atlantic Ocean, Spain. He's going to be under the Spanish flag, and he is going to lead to the greatest event, maybe in human history, since, at least for the Western Hemisphere, since the since the extinction of the dinosaur. And, it's going to be somebody who is a very Christian, Catholic, strong Catholic, and he didn't discover a new world because the world was already inhabited, but he creates a new world by going there. And we see this kind of collision of two old worlds that are going to collide: the European world with the Native American world, and the cause and effect will be a Columbian exchange, where we see this information traveling, and animals and plants traveling across the Atlantic Ocean back and forth, which is going to lead to a rise of Western Europe, and it'll lead to a collapse of the civilizations who were here before: the Aztecs, the Incans, the Native Americans in the North American continent. And I have a picture here. We have Machiavelli. He's going to be somebody who writes a book called The Prince. Talks about how human beings are motivated by their own selfish interests. So if you're a leader, you need to kind of placate towards those self-interests. You need to feed those self-interests, those ambitions. And then we have also, this is who America is named after. You're looking at Amerigo Vespucci, and here's his route. He's going to come up along the coast, and he'll be the one who names the continent America. Amerigo Vespucci is his name. And, these voyages you see here, these voyages are going to be printed on the printing press. And Columbus obviously discovers America. He thinks he actually came across India, and that's why he calls them Indians. But you see that this is going to lead to this mass production of books and these adventures that Europeans are going to say, oh man, that sounds cool, I'm going to go over there. And you're going to see a more influx of immigrants arriving on these coasts, either by force or by choice. And this is just giving you some backdrop. And at about this time, you will see that the Reformation is about to start. And we're seeing here in Germany, you will see a guy by the name of Martin Luther, who is, somebody who, travels to Rome, and he's a very strong Catholic. And when he gets to Rome, he's actually there. It takes him a couple weeks to get there. He's actually going to, it's going to be raining every day he's there for the month. he's going to realize, though, that in Rome, these priests are not as religious as he thought they would be. He's kind of somebody who is um, disappointed in many ways of how this pope acts. And the pope was made fun of for having a bunch of children out of wedlock. The pope will be actually not even there because he's out on a conquest, and he's leading an army, and he's excommunicating people from the church. So this is something that um, kind of he's taken back by. And what he actually realizes is the Roman priests, they don't really care about faith, they care about making money. And it kind of disappoints him a little bit. And many Romans don't understand why all these Northern Europeans want to actually come down to this place called Rome, because it's not very religious. And he's actually he's a priest, and he's somebody who is leading a sermon. He's getting poked in the ribs by the other priest, saying, "Hustle up, hurry up, get on with it, get on with it." So Martin Luther is going to be somebody who thinks that maybe we need to make some changes, but he doesn't really do that right away. He goes back to Germany. He lives in he preaches at a place, Wittenberg, I believe it was, and he's going to be there, and he'll be preaching when he hears about a man sent from Rome who's collecting indulgences. And he doesn't come in Wittenberg, but he comes outside of town. And what you're going to see here is many people travel out there, and what Luther realizes is people don't care about committing sins because they think they can just buy indulgences, that they can just pay for their crimes and they'll be sent to heaven. So you see that they're not really, they don't feel bad about, they're not asking for forgiveness. They just want to pay for the crimes they committed. He doesn't see a whole lot of passion. So he's actually going to post in 1517 the 95 Theses on the Roman Catholic Church. And this is going to lead to the Age of Reformation. And what he really attacks with these 95 Theses, now we have to look at the Catholic Church. The doors were the bulletin board of the day. And this is true in the place he's at. And, again, we have to look at time and place matter. He's fortunate in time. There's a guy that tries to do a similar thing 100 years earlier, and he gets burned at the stake. And you're going to see that Martin Luther, who actually got his name Martin after Saint Martin, because he was born the day before, on November 11th, actually will be known as Armistice Day, now Veterans Day. But Martin Luther, the Saint Martin was actually that day, and he's actually the patron for drinking and marry, for a merry time, but he's not going to bring a merry time to the Roman Catholic Church. He is going to actually, and he gets named in 1483, he's born in Saxony, Germany, to a peasant. And his dad, just to give you guys understanding of him, just briefly context, his dad was a very hot-tempered, he was a very stubborn man, which is going to be Martin Luther. And again, we can see how the apple and tree, how when the church actually tells him eventually to quiet down, to stop, to denounce what you already said, renounce, he's actually going to not denounce his statements. He's going to continue to write things that criticize the church and that challenge the church. And he'll be protected by Germany, who's going to be more leaning towards this new Protestant movement. Now, they actually call it the Protestants because these are the protesting estates. Protests. These are people challenging these estates, these different states out there that are challenging the Roman Catholic Church. They're known as the Protestants in short, which I thought was interesting. And if we see here, as I mentioned, life is about timing. And Martin Luther is going to revolutionize the idea of how to become conscious of some of these things going on at the time. And you're going to see many people argue, they slander his name. Other people are going to support him. Different places, different regions will support. Others will attack. But again, we see that here in Wittenberg, he is going to challenge the church. And and some interesting tidbits to look at. When he actually arrives in Rome, Michelangelo was actually painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which I thought was cool. And also, if we, look at Martin Luther, he is going to kind of just, again, wake up that consciousness of the day. And, it's going to be, his ideas are going to be printed on a printing press, and that's that time and place, and they're going to be spreading throughout Europe. And many people will back him. He'll eventually marry a former nun. He has 6 children with her. And then he actually takes in 11 orphans. And what he's going to actually do is he's going to translate the New Testament. And there'll be 430 different editions in his lifetime. This just shows us the constant changing of his ideas, and also shows us how many books could be printed and how fast they could be printed. And we're going to see these ideas actually split into other denominations as well. And this is where we have today the Baptists or the Calvinists, and then obviously the Lutherans, and eventually we have the Church of England. So we see that this is going to split many people's, I guess, opinions of the Catholic Church. Many people will stay Catholic, and today there's 70 million Lutherans worldwide. Majority of them live in Germany, Scandinavia, and the United States. And then also down in Switzerland, you had a guy in Geneva named John Calvin who is going to start up his movement as well. So we see this Reformation, reform, change for the better. It's going to change some things. Now, if we look at the Roman Catholic Church, there's going to be there's going to be an Inquisition that's going to try to put down the Reformation. There'll be some violence from the Protestants and Catholics, vice versa. But you're going to see that the church is going to actually survive the Reformation, the Roman Catholic Church. And it's going to spread to parts of Asia and Africa and the Americas. And they're going to make some changes as a result of the Reformation. If we look here, one of the problems was many priests were abusing their power, had many children out of wedlock, and were taking advantage of the situation where they were living very rich and affluent lives. So as a result, we'll actually see dark confessional boxes introduced, so the priest can no longer be maybe seduced by attractive woman. And we also see that many people, the priests are going to dedicate themselves to live a simple life and take vows of poverty, and not really maybe poverty, but chastity, and again, live the simple life rather than living for immaterial wealth. So again, the Reformation will actually make the Roman Catholic Church look in the mirror, and people were sick of the way these people were represented in the church, so you'll see them have to make some changes as a result. So everything's going on at the time. Before we get Enlightenment, you're looking at King Henry VIII. He is going to be somebody who had married his wife Catherine, who was actually the daughter of King Ferdinand and Isabella, but she did not give him a son, and he's going to ask for an annulment, and that means a divorce, and he wants the Roman Catholic Church to accept it. But the Pope, who is in Italy, obviously, he is actually going to not give the annulment, and there's a reason for that. He would probably have been killed if he did, because Spain, Charles V, his armies stood in Italy, and they threatened to kill the Pope if he did anything, if he accepted annulment. So what Henry VIII will do is he will have one of his essentially cardinals give him the annulment he wants in England, and you'll see the England will break away from the Roman Catholic Church as well. And he will actually marry a lady called Mary Ann Boleyn, who actually will give him another daughter. And this daughter will become Elizabeth I, and she is probably one of the most top 2, 3 most famous English leaders of all time, Elizabeth I. So if you're looking at some women in history who've made an impact, this lady right here, you could argue, makes one of the bigger impacts. And she's actually in charge of England when the Spanish Armada is going to send up and attempt to defeat England in a naval battle. And you're going to see that after 4 major encounters, the Armada will be defeated. The English were too nimble, they were too quick, and they would not be caught in any kind of trap. And this painting here I thought was cool. Was actually painted. It was actually painted on a wood that was taken from an Armada vessel that had been demolished off the coast of Scotland. So it just shows us, just see this little touch there. So we see that as a result of this, and if we look at the discovery of the New World, again by Columbus, he's going to come from a place called, let's look here real quick. I'm sorry, jump back. He's going to leave from a place called Spain. And we can see how geography plays a role in the New World. And Spain is going to travel over there. And then in Portugal, they're going to get very rich off the silver, the gold from the Native Americans. They're going to make a lot of money. But in the 1500s, they're going to send an armada up here to try to crush England, where Elizabeth I is going to, again, lead her countrymen. But the English are going to win. They're going to destroy that armada. And now England will be the ones who kind of carry on over here and will gain a foothold, a stronger foothold over here in Western Hemisphere, especially North America. So we see that this is going to, we see some cause and effect. We can see geography plays a role here. Look where Spain's located. It's the closest over here. to the of the European countries to the New World, as we called it, and England is not too far off as well. So just see the powers of geography there as well, which I thought were important to make sure we take a note of. Now,